The second I stepped out of the shower, I felt it. His stare. It wasn't soft or admiring. It was heavy, deliberate. He sat still on the edge of the bed, not moving, not speaking, just watching me like he was trying to solve something. That silence between us, it wasn't warm. It was charged. We'd been close the night before, but this morning he felt like someone else. The way he looked at me made my skin tighten. I wrapped the towel tighter, pretending not to notice, but inside I couldn't ignore it. He didn't say goodbye when he left for work. No touch, no eye contact. Just the quiet click of the door. And I stood there, frozen, trying to understand what just happened. All day I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The way he looked at me, it didn't feel like love. It felt like evaluation. Later, when he came home, he acted normal. Too normal. Smiles, casual questions, familiar gestures. But I felt it. The performance. And once you sense that something's off, it doesn't let go. That night, lying beside him, I remembered something he said months ago. A joke, maybe. About how wild it would be to see me with another woman. I laughed it off back then. But now? That comment echoed louder than it should. Was that all it was? A fantasy? Or had he been planting something? I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I started watching him back. Not as his wife, but as someone suddenly unsure of the rules. The shift didn't go away. It settled into the walls of our home like a draft. Invisible, but always present. He was kind, still affectionate in the way a good husband might be. But his actions felt timed. Not unnatural, just oddly synchronized, like he was performing a part he'd rehearsed. He still touched me, smiled, reached for my hand at the right moments. But something underneath was missing. And I felt it. Every time. I mirrored him, trying to stay in rhythm. I kept routines going, let my body move through the day like everything was fine. But my mind, my thoughts, they didn't rest. That comment he'd made months ago, once just a strange aside, had become something that wouldn't let go. I remembered the way he looked at me that morning. Not with affection, with interest. Like I was becoming a concept to him. A fantasy. A puzzle piece in a story he hadn't fully shared. At first, I tried to fight it. To keep the thought away. I told myself it didn't matter. But that only made the thought stronger. It wasn't just about what he wanted anymore. It became about me. Why did it bother me so much? Why did it make me question not only us, but myself? I started to notice other women. Not in the way he might have imagined. More subtle. I studied how they carried themselves. Confident, open, in control of their space. Not performing. Just present. Something about that captivated me. It wasn't sexual. It was a sense of independence I hadn't realized I missed. One day at a cafe, I sat near a woman who radiated calm. She wasn't dressed to impress. She was simply comfortable. I watched her sip her coffee and talk to a friend with easy laughter. She didn't notice me, but I noticed everything about her. And for the first time, I wondered, if I sat across from someone like her, what would I say? Who would I be? That night, I tried to mention it to him. A light comment, wrapped in humor. I expected surprise. Instead, he smiled. Not startled, not confused. Just calm. As if he'd been waiting for me to get there. That smile sat with me for hours after. It didn't reassure me. It pushed me further into my own thoughts. In the following days, I imagined more. Not situations, outcomes. What if I explored this and hated it? Or worse, what if I liked it too much? What if it changed how I saw him? Or how he saw me? It became less about desire and more about identity. A quiet rebellion was growing inside me. Not against him, but against the version of me that had been running on autopilot for years. I wasn't unhappy, but I wasn't whole either. And once you realize that, You can't pretend otherwise. He didn't bring it up, neither did I. But the space between us wasn't empty. It was loaded with unspoken awareness. We both knew something was coming. We just didn't know when. So I made a choice. I wasn't going to be led into this. I was going to lead. If this path was opening, I would walk it my way. No promises, no rush. Just a quiet agreement with myself to stop pretending I wasn't curious. It wasn't about anyone else. Not yet. It was about me. About exploring, not an experience, but a part of myself I'd kept locked away under the label of someone's wife, someone's partner, someone predictable. And maybe that was the scariest realization of all, that sometimes the person you've been for years isn't the full story, just the safest one. It happened on a Thursday. One of those days that blends into every other, until it doesn't. Until it becomes something you return to in your mind over and over again, wondering if that was the moment everything changed, or if it had changed long before. I almost didn't go to the gym that day. I'd been restless, distracted, moving through the house like a ghost. I kept thinking about that smile he gave me. The one that wasn't surprised when I brought up the idea. The one that looked too calm, too ready. It wasn't just his fantasy anymore. It was something more. Something real, and I wasn't sure I liked that. I wasn't even sure I understood it. She was already there when I arrived. I hadn't seen her before. Or maybe I had, but never like this. She moved like she had nothing to prove. Confident without effort. Alone but never unnoticed. There was something about that kind of energy that made you pay attention, even when you didn't mean to. We stretched across from each other, not close, not distant. At one point, our eyes met. Just for a second. No smile, no nod, just connection. Something passed between us, quiet and unspoken, but undeniably there. It should have ended there. Most things do. But in the locker room, as she passed behind me to grab her bag, her hand brushed lightly against my back. Not suggestive, not even intentional. Maybe. But I felt it. Sharp, precise, alive. I turned, expecting her to say something. She didn't. She looked at me one more time and walked out. No message. No hesitation. That single moment unraveled me more than I expected. I went home with that touch still echoing through me, like a question I couldn't answer. That night, he was warm again. Affectionate even. But I wasn't fully there. My mind was split. Not because I was comparing, but because a door had cracked open, and something in me had leaned toward the light. The next time I saw her, I moved closer. Not obviously, just enough. She slowed her pace to match mine. Again, we didn't speak. But the silence between us had texture now, intention, recognition. We began to orbit each other in small, subtle ways, choosing mats near one another, timing workouts to overlap. It wasn't flirtation. It was curiosity, mutual and silent, a kind of pull. And I didn't resist it. I let it happen. The kiss came days later in the parking lot. We'd both stayed late, both lingered after the last stretch. We walked out together like it was planned, though it wasn't. I said something. Something small, maybe a joke, I don't even remember. She turned, met my eyes and leaned in. There was no hesitation, no drama, just certainty. Her lips touched mine, gently but not unsure. My first reaction was stillness, the kind that comes from shock. But I didn't step away. I didn't stop it. I let it happen. It wasn't a long kiss. It wasn't about heat or passion. It was about clarity. And when she stepped back and smiled, just a small, unreadable curve of her lips, I didn't feel confused. I felt awake. Driving home, my heart was racing, but it wasn't panic. It was presence. My hands shook slightly on the wheel, and I welcomed the sensation. Because for the first time in weeks, I wasn't wrapped in someone else's fantasy. I was standing in something of my own. I didn't tell him, not that night. maybe not ever. I wasn't sure what it meant yet, but I knew what it didn't mean. Guilt. What I felt wasn't betrayal. It was beginning. A small, undeniable piece of truth I couldn't unlive. I didn't tell him. Not the next day, not the one after. There was no plan to hide it, but there was no urgency to explain it either. The kiss wasn't about him. It didn't belong to our marriage. It belonged to me. A moment I wasn't ready to give away. Yet everything felt different afterward. I moved through our life with a calm I didn't recognize at first. Like something inside me had finally gone quiet. Not out of fear or guilt, but because a decision had been made, even if I didn't know what it was yet. I still played the part. Dinner, conversation, shared routines. But internally, I was watching everything, especially him. I noticed things I'd stopped paying attention to long ago. The way he checked his phone while I talked. How he looked through me sometimes, not at me. And how now he was starting to look again. Not like before, not possessively, but attentively. Like something had shifted in me and he felt it. What surprised me wasn't his reaction. It was mine. I didn't feel defensive. I didn't feel the need to overcompensate or reassure him. I felt grounded, in control. Like for the first time in a long time, I wasn't moving through someone else's story. I was beginning to write my own. I didn't push him away. I just stopped chasing his cues. I didn't ask what he was thinking. I didn't try to decode his silences. I let things be quiet. I let myself have space. And the strange thing was, he started filling it. Soft touches, thoughtful gestures, a return of attention I hadn't asked for but had missed more than I admitted. Still, I couldn't forget how it felt. Being kissed without being claimed. Being chosen without being expected. That kiss had become a line in the sand. Before it, I was waiting for permission. After it, I understood I didn't need any. In small ways, I started shifting. I went on walks without telling him where I was headed. I started cooking things only I liked. I stopped explaining myself for every hour unaccounted for. None of it was dramatic, but it was intentional. I wasn't acting out. I was carving out. One evening, I sat across from him while we ate, and I realized how often I'd edited myself to avoid friction. All those small compromises, not just in action, but in thought. And I understood something important. The version of me he loved wasn't the full version. It was the easy one. The one I polished to keep us comfortable. That night I opened an old notebook. Not to write about the kiss or even about him, but to remember myself. I wrote without censoring. Pages about feeling unseen, about wondering where I ended and he began. I didn't come to conclusions. I didn't need to. Just naming those things made them real again. We still shared a bed, still kissed goodnight, still spoke like we always had. But I was different now. Not to punish him, not to drift from him, but to return to something I'd let go of. Me. And once you begin returning to yourself, everything else starts to feel temporary. Even love. I started planning without realizing it. Not a strategy. Just small moves. Quiet choices that felt like mine again. The kind you don't ask permission for. It began with a dinner reservation. A place he liked, but this time I chose it. No conversation, no what do you feel like. I wore something new, something bold I'd bought without thinking about his reaction. And when I walked in, I saw it in his eyes. Not confusion, interest. I didn't wait for a compliment. I didn't need it. That night he watched me. Really watched. I could feel it, like he was trying to figure out what changed. The answer was simple. I had. This wasn't about being secretive. I didn't hide, but I didn't explain either. The balance between us had shifted, and I wasn't chasing his approval. I wasn't trying to fulfill a fantasy. I was moving for me. The idea of a night, one night, grew slowly. I didn't plan it as a performance. It wasn't about showing him anything. It was about marking something inside me. A moment I could point to and say, here. This is where I stopped waiting and started deciding. I reached out to her, the woman from the gym, the one whose presence stayed with me. I messaged her simply, directly, no flirting, just truth. She responded in kind, clear, open, uncomplicated. We agreed on a date, no questions asked. And that somehow made it feel even more real. The night before, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was scared, because I was alive. A kind of restless clarity pulsed through me. Not the anxiety of someone doing something wrong, the awareness of someone stepping into something unknown with her eyes open. The next morning, I watched him. Peaceful, unbothered, drinking his coffee like any other day. He had no idea what was already in motion. And I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sneaky. I felt like I was finally reclaiming something I'd buried for years. That evening, I told him to be home by 8. No explanation, just a tone that didn't invite questions. He said okay, curious, maybe, but compliant. That one moment, when he looked at me across the room just for a second too long, was the only clue he had. And I let it sit. I prepared slowly, intentionally. I chose soft lighting, low music, clean simplicity. It wasn't about being seductive. It was about feeling present in my body, whole, awake. When she arrived, there was no ceremony, no awkwardness. She was exactly as I remembered, centered, quiet, in her own rhythm. We exchanged just a few words. That was all it took. The clock moved faster than I expected. At 7:58, I stood near the hallway mirror, adjusting something small, not on my face, but in my posture. A reminder to stay grounded, not as a wife, not as a performer, just as a woman who had chosen. At 8 sharp, the front door opened. He stepped in, looked around. I met him there. No explanations, no theatrics, just an extended hand. He took it. This was not about testing him. It wasn't even about including him. It was about stepping fully into something that was mine. We entered the room together. She was already seated, waiting. Calm. Composed. The room shifted with her presence, not dramatic, just quietly undeniable. And in that moment, before anyone moved, I knew this was the moment I had been walking toward. Not for him, not for her, for me. He sat by the window in the armchair, his posture unreadable. Not stiff, not relaxed, just alert. Watching, but not directing. Holding space for something he couldn't predict. She stood across from me, composed. Not searching for cues, just waiting. There was no plan, no script, only presence. And that was what made it real. This wasn't something done for him. It wasn't even something done with him. It was mine, ours, shared, but not performed. She stepped toward me first, unrushed, grounded. I didn't back away. I let the moment pull us together naturally, like the tide. Her hand brushed mine. It wasn't electric. It was steady. That steadiness mattered more than anything else in the room. When our lips met, it wasn't like before. The first kiss had been spontaneous, a moment of clarity. This one was chosen, intentionally, open-eyed, and because of that, it was quieter, deeper. It didn't take me out of my body. It placed me more fully in it. I didn't close my eyes right away. I stayed aware. I wanted to feel everything. Not just the kiss, but what it meant to stand there, to be seen, to choose this in the open. I sensed a shift behind me. A breath, the way the chair creaked slightly. But I didn't turn. That wasn't my focus. I wasn't checking his reaction. I wasn't looking for permission or approval. I wasn't giving a performance. This was about trust. In myself, in the moment, in the way things had unfolded without force. And when the kiss deepened, I didn't overthink it. I allowed it. Let it fill a space in me I hadn't even known was empty. When we paused, we didn't speak. We didn't need to. She sat beside me on the edge of the bed, our hands still lightly touching. There was no tension, no rush, no obligation, just presence, full and still. Eventually, I looked at him. Our eyes met. His face didn't reveal much, but there was something in the quiet. Not judgment, not discomfort, just observation, maybe even understanding. He didn't speak. He didn't stand. He just watched. And for the first time, I didn't feel exposed. I felt respected, or maybe just free from needing anything from him in that moment. Later, when she left, we didn't hug, didn't linger. We didn't make plans. We didn't need to. There was no drama in the exit, only a nod, quiet and clear. He didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. What happened didn't require explanation. It wasn't a secret. It wasn't a test. It was truth. My truth. And I wasn't ashamed of it. That night, we moved through the house like usual, but something had shifted. There was more space between us. Not coldness, not resentment. Just room. To breathe. To exist. To process. He followed me to bed a few minutes later. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It was neutral. Open. Unforced. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't need to rehearse how I felt. I didn't run mental circles around what it all meant. I simply lay down and let myself be. I had kissed her. Fully. In front of him. And I felt no guilt. No shame. Only clarity. I didn't expect to miss her. But I did. Not romantically. Not for the kiss or the touch. I missed the version of myself I became in her presence. Alert, grounded, complete. That night had cut through the noise of routine and expectation. For a moment, I had felt unfiltered. And once you feel that, it's hard to go back. The days that followed were quiet. Normal on the outside. But everything inside had shifted. I noticed it in the way he moved around me. Still close, still kind, but cautious now. Like he was trying to read a language I hadn't spoken before. One I was still learning myself. There were no fights, no tension. But there was space. A kind I didn't want to close too quickly, because it was honest, and I needed that more than comfort. He offered more attention, gentle touches, longer glances, more questions than usual. And while I didn't pull away, I also didn't perform. I stayed where I was, in that in-between space, no longer who I had been, not yet sure who I was becoming. One afternoon, folding laundry with the hum of the dryer in the background, it hit me. I couldn't go back. Not because anything was broken, but because I wasn't small anymore. I'd expanded, quietly, irreversibly, and returning to the shape I used to fit in felt like suffocation. That evening, I sent her a message. Simple, honest, I'd like to see you. Her response was just as steady. Name the time. That steadiness was something I'd come to value more than I realized. It reminded me that this wasn't chaos. It was clarity. This time, I didn't prepare anything elaborate. No scented candles, no soundtracks, just space. Real, lived-in space. And myself, unfiltered. That was enough. I told him to be home by 8. No build-up, no explanation. Just a calm request that sounded more like a fact. He didn't push back, just nodded, and I could see in his eyes that he knew. This wasn't a replay. It was continuation. When she arrived, I opened the door without hesitation. She stepped inside like she belonged there, not because of what had happened before, but because of how we both carried ourselves now. There was nothing to prove, nothing to act out, just presence. When he came home, I watched his face as realization settled in. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This wasn't novelty. This was real. I didn't wait for him to catch up. I took his hand and led him down the hall. My body knew the way. My mind was still. My heart, open but firm. The room looked different this time. Less perfect, more natural. A place for something real to unfold, not something choreographed. She was already inside, standing calmly by the window. The moment he entered, she turned, acknowledged him, then looked to me, and I stepped forward without a word. When we kissed, it wasn't hesitant. It wasn't bold either. It was true. A shared understanding between women who weren't trying to be anything other than what they were in that moment. Her hands met my waist. Mine found hers. And as our bodies drew closer, I opened my eyes and looked at him. He wasn't afraid, but he wasn't untouched. Something inside him shifted. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands pressed together. I reached toward him, not to invite, to include. A quiet reminder. I hadn't disappeared, but I wasn't returning to what we had. I was asking him, could he step into this new version with me? Because I wasn't leaving anything behind. I was simply choosing to no longer leave parts of myself out. We didn't speak much after. None of us. There wasn't a need. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't avoidance. It was something fuller than conversation. The kind of silence that settles after something true has finally been lived. We remained where we were. She and I on the edge of the bed. He's still in the chair, arms resting on the sides, eyes not fixed but soft, open. There was no awkwardness, no glances asking what's next. We had moved past the point of needing to label anything. Eventually, she stood, collected her things without rush or pause. Her presence never wavered. And when she looked at me, just a quiet glance, I felt more held than I had by any embrace. He opened the door for her, a quiet courtesy. She didn't say goodbye in words. She didn't need to. The exchange had already happened. In full. Without error. When the door closed, the house changed again. Not into emptiness, into gravity. Something in the walls felt heavier. Not in a burdened way. In a way that suggested something had taken root. A truth that couldn't be undone. I moved slowly through the room, folding a throw, adjusting the pillows, brushing the edge of the sheets. My hands moved from habit. My thoughts didn't race. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't even trying to process. I was letting it all arrive, letting it be. He stayed seated, silent, still, not withdrawn, just present, as if he knew the moment required stillness more than words. I eventually sat beside him. Not close, not far. We didn't touch, didn't reach, we just sat. Breathing the same air, sharing the same weight, and for a moment it felt like enough. There was no question to answer. No breakdown to walk through. The truth wasn't a thing we needed to explain. It had already been spoken, not in language, but in choice, in gesture, in the fact that we were still here. That night, we got into bed like we always had, but nothing about it felt routine. Not cold, not warm, just honest. I turned toward the wall, not to retreat, just to feel my own body in its own space, to breathe for myself. I didn't wait for him to touch me. He didn't reach, and that too felt okay. Sometimes intimacy isn't in the closeness. It's in the space you allow one another. The quiet that says, I see you. I'm letting you be. I didn't feel resolved. I didn't feel brave or proud. I felt real. Like a woman who had let herself want something outside the script and survived the wanting. He shifted beside me. I heard it. A quiet exhale. The slow weight of a man trying to understand a woman who'd stopped asking for his understanding. I didn't move. I didn't respond. I let the silence wrap around us. There's a kind of peace in letting things be unfinished, in not demanding the moment be anything other than what it is. That night, I fell asleep not waiting, not wondering, just resting. In myself. The next morning was quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't heavy or strained, just whole. complete, like the silence that follows something honest. I woke before him. The light was soft, stretching across the floor in pale streaks. I didn't move for a while. I just lay there, breathing into the stillness. No part of me was rushing toward explanation or reassurance. There was nothing to fix. Nothing broken. Just a woman and her breath. When I got up, the house felt different beneath my feet. Not unfamiliar, more grounded. More mine. I padded to the kitchen, made coffee, leaned against the counter, and let the warmth fill my hands. Outside, the world was unchanged. Inside, everything had shifted. He entered quietly, sometime later. No words, no hesitation, just presence. Our eyes met briefly, and we held it, not to search for answers, but to say, I see you. We sat at the table. Two people, no performance, no aftermath. That was the gift of it all. Not the moment itself, but the way it didn't demand to be anything. It didn't need to be named. It just was. After he left the room, I opened my journal, the one I hadn't written in for years before all this began. I didn't write about her, or him. I wrote about breath, about freedom, about how long I had been waiting to feel unedited. The pen moved easily. No second guessing. I filled a page without knowing how. Then I closed it. Not because I was done, but because I had said what needed saying. To myself. Later, I stood in front of the mirror. No makeup. No posing. I looked at myself like I was meeting someone I hadn't fully seen in a long time. And for once, I didn't look for something wrong. I didn't rehearse who I was supposed to be. I just saw her. Steady. Real. Not asking for permission. He walked past behind me. I didn't turn. Didn't speak. He didn't either. We weren't avoiding. We were existing. Honestly, finally. There was no resolution that morning. No shared conclusion. No decision made over coffee. And yet something had ended. And something else, something quieter, more durable, had begun. I didn't know what we were now. I didn't know what would come next. But I knew who I was. And that knowing was enough to hold me. Not everything needs a name. Not every chapter needs a title. Some stories close with silence. Some beginnings don't start with a spark, just with the absence of weight. And in that weightless space, I found something I hadn't had in years. Room.